Yes, ma'am.
Order. With the right to the pledge. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Davis?
Here.
Mr. Moats?
Here.
Mrs. Evelyn? Here. Mr. Wall?
Here.
Mr. Baker? Mr. Morgan?
Here.
Okay, so this evening we do have a couple of special presentations, and we're going to spare Chris and her colleague there the agony of the 5-year forecast. So if you wouldn't mind coming up and giving your presentation to us, that would be great.
All right, well, good evening-ish. It's kind of evening. I'm Jeremiah Fleischman. I am the current president of the Defiance City Schools Foundation. And just here to kind of introduce you to ourselves, as well as to officially kick off our fall campaign. You may or may not know, but the foundation for Defiance City Schools was formed 35 years ago in 1989 to support educational opportunities for the students here in the Defiance City School District. And the primary goal of the foundation is to improve the quality of education, leadership, scholastic programs of the school district, which in turn will benefit our entire community. So the foundation provides a platform for which individuals, businesses, other organizations can provide private gifts to benefit the students, the staff, and programs of the school district. These gifts are invested locally and are distributed to provide additional support for equipment, technology, academic programs, teaching materials, and curriculum projects in order to have the greatest impact on the greatest number of students. And in 2023, the foundation was able to award $19,123 to teachers in the form of mini grants. These grants are used by the teachers to purchase items to assist them in the classroom. And in addition to the mini grants, the foundation was also able to award $11,110 to scholarships for Defiance City School seniors to further their education at the college of their choice. The Defiance City Schools Foundation is run by a volunteer board of trustees. These trustees oversee the investments. And as of August 31st of this year, those investments were over $1.1 million. The foundation sets policy and provides overall direction and supervision of all foundation activities. All board meetings, as well as the foundation records, are open to the public. And the Defiance City Schools Foundation Board also reviews, monitors, and oversees the assets and grants in this fund. And each year, the foundation embarks on a capital campaign to support the funds that are used for the mini grants. And in this year, we are excited, I'm excited, we are very excited to share that Linda Thomas has graciously agreed to be the honorary chair. And you should be receiving a letter within the next few weeks sharing her story of support for the Defiance City Schools and the foundation. Now, in order to use these funds and these investments in an economical, responsible way, the foundation has partnered with the Defiance City Schools Foundation has partnered with the Defiance Area Foundation, who manages and invests those funds. And with that, I'd like to introduce Chris Yoder, who is the Executive Director of the Defiance Area Foundation.
Thank you, Jeremiah. We're also really excited about Linda Thomas being the honorary chair. She came into our office last week, and it was the Crescent meeting with Jeremiah and Linda, and her daughter brought her in, and she's so excited, and she's so honored to be in this role, and she keeps asking, what can I do, how can I help? So she's just very, very appreciative of that, and had such wonderful things to say about the school and her experience here. So we're excited for that to come out in the Crescent and for you to receive the newsletters with her kind words. We're thankful for the opportunity to work with the Defiance City School Foundation Board and the Defiance City Schools to achieve its mission. The Defiance Area Foundation uses 3 local money managers for our investments: the State Bank and Trust Company, Premier Bank Wealth Management, and Collins and Guilford in Hicksville to manage the $16.5 million under our umbrella. We've been partnering with the Defiance City Schools Foundation now for over a decade, since 2012, and the annualized return history of our fund managers was included in the board packets that were distributed. The assets are invested 60% in equities and 40% in stocks for all three of our fund managers, according to our investment policy that's outlined for them. The general fund value that supports the teacher mini grants at the end of August had a value of $659,341. So the upcoming annual campaign is to raise funds for the teacher mini grants. The remaining fund balance, Jeremiah mentioned $1.5 million. The remaining balance supports 5 scholarship funds. We recently met, the Defiance Area Foundation, Sue Straussbaugh, our scholarship chair, met with Mr. Jerger and Mr. Singer here at the high school to talk about how we could have a greater impact on students from a scholarship perspective, and we explored some various opportunities. The foundation's going to be using a common application, so we're hoping to help drive more students to use that common application to apply for scholarships, so more students benefit. Under the foundation umbrella, Defiance City School Foundation umbrella, is a Hope Tree Fund that was established by Kristen Nussbaum after Jim Nussbaum passed away several years ago. That fund is in memory of Jim, and gifts contributed to that fund is funded through memorials, fundraisers, and a Jeans Day that they have in place. And grants will be awarded to teachers, administration, and those in need. And no funds have yet been awarded, but there's a committee that will be established through the Defiance City School Foundation that will determine that need and determine grants from that fund. There's also a capital projects fund that was established a few years ago, and remaining funds from the teacher mini grant fund, if all of them are not awarded and there's extra funds in that program, those funds will be used put into the capital project funds to be used for teacher-driven projects such as an outdoor learning center. Again, those funds will come from the excess in the general fund. On behalf of the Defiance Area Foundation and our Board of Trustees, we've appreciated the opportunity to work with the Defiance City School Foundation and to partner with you. And we appreciate your partnership and all you do for the Defiance City Schools and your hearts for our community. Does anyone have any questions for Jeremiah or myself on the funds?
I have no question, just comment. I have an opportunity as the superintendent to be a board member, and Wes is also a board member as the board representative. It is really interesting and exciting to see we have the entire gamut of young professionals and family members on the board, as well as retired staff members some are serving possibly even their second time or third time go around. And we've got a great volunteer board that meets. They take their boardmanship seriously. They're engaged, and we brainstorm with ideas about people like Linda Thomas being the honorary chair. People are excited about that. I feel honored I had the opportunity to call her and ask her if she'd be willing to do that. And of course, she followed up with me after she met with you folks, and she's even more excited than when I asked her. So thank you for taking the time to meet with her and getting that started for us. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Is that outdoor learning thing she mentioned, is that the one that is,
We've actually, so it's a combination, so we have this fund set up, but if you look the fund and how you can expend funds out of it, we have to let this fund grow so that there's some opportunity, but we also have a grant that through the Ohio Environmental Education Foundation that is partially funding that along with some city schools dollars. We've actually started that last week, ironically, so getting some areas cleared out, so it'll be really cool when it's finished. And that will be in honor in memory of Jim Nussbaum and his family. They're contributing greatly to it as well. Yep.
Any other questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you for inviting us. Thank you.
All right, and now we're going to move on. Before we get into that 5-year forecast, Cheryl, if you don't mind, I just want to note that we are adding to our agenda tonight an addendum for an easement under 5.3 and 6.1 for approval. Just making note that we've added that to this agenda. And now we can get into your 5-year forecast, if you would.
Thank you. I know you're all anxious to wait this time. So everybody knows that we have the November 5-year forecast and it has to be submitted to the Department of Education by November 30th. So I'm gonna go ahead and start by just giving you kind of an overview of what the 5-year forecast is and how it's moving forward. So we're updating it because we're required by the Higher Revised Code. Expenditure growth in this forecast is expected to outpace revenue change, although I think we have a lot of positive things going on in this forecast. I just want to keep that on the forefront of everyone's mind. The cash balance by 2029 is forecast to decline over 2.4 million compared to what it is in 2024. And expenditures are projected to exceed revenues in 2026 to 2029. So, but I will point out, this is the first time I think that we presented a forecast in November since I've been here where we weren't deficit spending for 2 years. We were usually deficit spending all 5. So, I mean, there is progress being made forward on that, so. Summary on expenses. There's a lot of changes happening in revenue and expenses. Some of the expenses that we've done in the past have been taken out of grants. So we are just finishing up the ARP ESSER grant, which you guys are aware of the COVID grants that we received. That ended September of 2024. We have taken out of that grant salaries, benefits, we bought textbooks, we bought computers, we bought a bus, we paid for all of our copiers. So all of that recurring debt is going to come back into the general fund in this forecast, which has been forecast before, but you'll actually see those numbers coming through again. So that's why our expenditures historically have only been less than 1%, and our expenditures going forward are close to 8%. So one of the significant changes in expenses from last revenue or from last forecast to this forecast is purchase services. We did pay for the Northwest Ohio ESC preschool that we have out of that grant for the last 3 years. So that's a significant amount of expense that's coming back into the district. So then you can see listed there, those are the ARP expenses that will be returning to the general fund this year. So we funded the Alt Center, portions of Kinder Start that weren't funded by another grant, some administrative positions, a fiscal support position, and a couple of intervention teachers. So without the changes that we're making in this forecast and decisions that the board has made previously, we could have been looking at a different situation with those positions, and also with our preschool. So we've also purchased textbooks, Chromebooks, and like I said before, copiers and buses. So that line on there shows you the overall forecast going forward, where the yellow line shows where we're outpacing, expenditures outpacing revenues. So going into revenue, we're funded by 3 major sources: local taxes, state resources, and other income. So our local taxes that our local taxpayers pay are real estate tax, public utility tax, and income tax. State resources, of course, are your state funding, restricted aid, and they do property tax. They used to be called property tax allocation. Now they're calling it state share of local tax. That is your homestead and rollback that you can get tax credits on your home. When the state made that decision to give that tax break to taxpayers, they reimburse the districts for that loss of revenue. Sorry. The first major line in the forecast is property taxes. It accounts for about 22% of our overall funding. Of the property taxes that we collect, we are heavily reliant on residential and agricultural. Residential is 82%. That is 82% of our actual tax base. So the remaining, which is commercial and industrial, which is considered class 2, and then a little bit of public utility, make up the difference. So one of the things I'll talk about is, like, since we're at the 20 mil floor, when we get a valuation increase like we saw back in 2023 at the triennial update, we do receive additional funds for that, but it's not as much as we would receive if we weren't on the floor. So what we receive it on, is the inside mills, and then, anything that's not against the floor, which would be your emergency levy. So, now, speaking of the emergency levy, it renews in fiscal year 28, which means that it will be May or November of 27, we would need to go on the ballot for that. The triennial update that I spoke about was close to 25%, which I'm sure everybody who lives in the city or in Defiance County will be able to attest that their taxes probably did go up to some level. But not all of that was the school district. Like, I know like when they sent out those tax bills, there was a chart on there that said what portion goes where. We did receive additional taxes. They were more on commercial and industrial than they were on residential because of being at the 2004. The changes from the forecast, I'm sorry. I'll go to, no, stay there, public utility, personal property, sorry. It's a little bit less than 3% of general fund funding. It's generated from personal property values and additions and depreciations by the utility company. So we don't receive a whole lot of funding for that, but it does collect at the full voted millage that it was voted on. So it collects at 41.85 mils. Historical change has been 29,000. And forecast forward, there's actually a negative amount, but you'll see that when we're forecasting forward with some of our taxes, because in those last 2 years of the forecast, the emergency levy comes off. So that gets put below on the 5-year forecast, so that kind of lowers that forecasted amount kind of prematurely based on that levy renewing, because we can't assume that that levy is going to renew until the board decides to put it on the ballot then, so. State share of local property taxes is another tax. That's the one I talked about that we get from the state. It's 21% of our total funding. Historical change has been about 3%, forecasted is about 3%, so it stays pretty steady. There has been talk at the state level about changing those reimbursements, but until we see that, we're forecasting it as it currently is. But I do expect some sort of changes coming down the pipe in the next couple of years for that, so. And then just in fiscal year 25, it says about 11.7% of local residential property taxes are reimbursed by the state in the form of rollbacks and credits.
Cheryl, really quick question.
Sure.
Under 1.01, where commercial and industrial, the notes include 6% of public utility personal property.
Right.
What does that mean?
So the public utility personal property that's over here, that's 2.56 of the funding, is part of that 18.73%. So if you subtract the 6% out of the 18.73, that's what is commercial and industrial. Does that make sense?
12% is commercial or industrial.
So that it's just that how they divided with class 1 and class 2, I wanted to show that would equal 100%, but I didn't want you to think because public utility is a separate line item that that's not included in that.
Okay.
If that makes sense. Any other questions? Changes from the last forecast to this forecast for real estate, public utility, and for the state share of local taxes. When you compare this forecast to the last forecast, we did not have the final numbers from the triennial update. So you will see increases in actual tax collections from the last forecast to this forecast in 2024, and then those increases are forecasted forward. And you can see those amounts down at the bottom of the first box, which is 277,000, 132, 137, and 129. So we do see some form of an increase from that real estate, and that is forecast going forward. And that's based on, like I said, the increased actual collections in 2024. So, public utility, personal property, changes to the May forecast are again impacted by that triennial update. So if you look at the numbers down there, you can see that it increased 34,000, 20, 12, and then 19. So, and that's just basically based on what I have forecast for the changes in tax revenue. So After the first year of a triennial update, we always forecast a negative amount because we're going through board of revisions. And we have in the past had people submit board of revisions. So that usually results in a very low, if not negative, increase. So that's why some of those moving forward you'll see are less, because remember, we collect a year in arrears. So the board of revision you would see in 2026 or 2025, if somebody submitted that this year. So we usually can test them, and I think I brought those to you before. And normally through that we either get some sort of cooperation from the Defiance County being able to, at least either lower or match the rate that we have, or we get some sort of like payment in lieu to offset the loss in taxes. So that chart down at the bottom just shows you the district property taxes by tax year. And I just kind of wanted to point out, where you can see the increases with the triennial update moving forward. Now this is property tax value, so keep in mind you'll see the increase in 2023 because that's the property tax value that's not collected for us until 2024. Any questions on the changes? Okay. Next thing is school district income tax. I kind of want to give a historical perspective of what this is because the pandemic really had an effect on the collection of that income tax. Part of that had to do with the fact that they pushed the tax deadline back, and then also people weren't working as much as they normally would during the pandemic, and we had a lot of unemployment. So in 2021, we saw a decrease of 7%, and then fiscal year 22-23, we kind of recouped some of those losses. Moving forward as people started to go back to work, and the pandemic seemed to be more in our rearview mirror than in the forefront. And then in fiscal year 24, we're still experiencing a small loss from that. But I think a portion of that is timing of collections as well. So because our withholding was down, so when I talked to the state of Ohio Department of Taxation about it, the collection was less than what they thought it was going to be. So they were looking in to see if there was like a large business or something that didn't make payments the way they should, or if there was a loss of presence of a large business in town. So historical changes have been about 4%. Forecast going forward is about 4%. So you can see in the chart there, you can see the effect of the pandemic, the collections after 2024, and then it kind of levels off. This normally has an increase every year of about 4 to 5%. If you take out the anomalies of the pandemic. So we're still collecting what we should have been collecting based on the average of the historical in the future. So the changes from May to November, they were based on actual collections in July of 2024. So the percentages that you see increase have been decreased a little bit because of that slight decrease in 2024. And then we'll adjust those as we get collections, if we see if we get that big collection back. If it is in fact a business that didn't pay, or if it's a business that moved out, we won't get that back. So I'm not aware of any large commercial properties that have moved out of Defiance, so I didn't really think that that was the case, but we'll find out. And then in addition to that, you can see the changes in fiscal years 25 to 28, like 35,000 the first year, 45, 56, and 68,000 respectively. So it's going up just a small amount, but not as much as it was in the May forecast. Any questions? Unrestricted grants and aid. So I'm kind of going to just go over the major changes that we had with this. I mean, all of you are aware of what unrestricted aid is. All of you are aware that we're on the Fair School funding formula. Some of the major changes with the Fair School funding formula with this biennium budget is that we updated from 2018 numbers to 2022, which is a significant increase for us for funding because they were taking the values based on valuations in 18 versus 22. And other factors that feed into that formula. So that was a really big, I don't want to say win for the Fair School funding plan, but it was a really good push for us for increased revenue. So The plan, I'm sure all of you read this in your spare time, but the plan is based on what they call a base cost calculation. That base cost calculation includes these 4 items down here, and these are the amounts that feed into, those numbers. Once that total number is established, and it's about 19,065,145, it is then taken and divided into a local and a state share. The reason I bring that up is because of the increased valuations from the Defiance County Auditor, our local share is increasing. So when you look at the formula, the base cost amount itself doesn't change, and it actually will go up over the forecast, but how it's divided between the state and us changes based on our valuation and based on taxpayer income. So the fact that in 2023 we went up over 24% in property tax values is already impacting the future of the 5-year forecast when it comes to that division. So I think that's important that people know that, yes, we are getting a lot of state funding, we are getting funding from the state, but as you can see, our local share is going to change. So if you look down here, the local share of the base cost is projected to go up 476 by fiscal year 2029. You think that's a lot of money, times 2,400 kids, it's a lot of money. And then the state share is projected to go down by 188. So they're shifting that burden from the state onto us. So even though we see an increase in state funding, it's not going to be as much as we would have seen if we didn't have the increased property valuation.
And Cheryl, this was pretty common with an increase around the state of Ohio in terms of updates, triennial updates. And with the new phase-in of the fair school funding formula, do you have an opinion on maybe that was an intentional move?
I think you know my opinion on that.
All right.
So I think that, I know a lot of times we talk about politicians and how much they know about school funding, but I really think that whoever came up with this, the fair school funding people were, superintendents from other districts, they were financial people, they were a couple legislators. They did a good job doing the funding piece for schools, but there also is a piece in there like this, where it's like, even though we are getting increased funding, over time, that could shift that burden back to local taxpayers. And I think that the state was well aware of that when they agreed to the fair school funding. And it's probably a portion why they did. So they were out there promoting, it's a great move for schools, which it was, but I don't think everybody realized on the back end that they were taking some of that back over time. The other thing I wanted to point out is that in fiscal year 25, our what they call base cost for each student is $8,124. But if you look at our state report card for fiscal year 24, our per student cost was $10,893. So you have your legislators out there saying that we're funding 60-70% of schools of their base cost. 100% true. But they're not funding 70% of a cost per pupil to educate a child. So actually, if you take our per pupil cost from the state report card and subtract out the state share, the local share is $5,698, which is higher than the state share. So it's just one of the things that I think that people need to be aware of, especially when you have politicians running for office and they're out there saying that they're giving school districts twice as much money in the base formula than what the locals pay, because that's not necessarily the whole picture. And then again, you can see where the local shares is going up as the state share is going down, because I projected increases in valuation. Any questions? Another thing they talk about with the base cost, and you saw those 4 items that were included in the base cost for unrestricted aid. 76 for that estimate is for personnel related costs. So that's not what we spend on education, that's what the state gives us based on that formula. 76% of that money has to go toward personnel services, and the district right now spends over 78% for personnel, so we're well within the range of where we should be. And then I did put a note on there looking at the 2024 school report card for finances. The district has been rated 14 out of 262 similar sized districts for classroom instruction spending. So if you're looking at this graph down here, you can see the blue is what is spent on classroom instruction. So the state has this one, our comparison group is this, and you can see ours is the biggest of those three. So we're spending the money in the right places, and we're also spending less than the state average. So we're not only spending it better, we're spending less better. That make sense? So, the Fair School Funding Plan also, and I'm sure all you are aware of this, where we talk about funding students' butts and seats. So that was some of the changes over 22 through 27, where they did the phase-in where our enrollment went from being very high to then going down about 200-300 students because they no longer did open enrollment in, open enrollment out, and funded it through the forecast as an expense and a revenue. So now they don't even give you that money, they don't take that money away, they just give you what kids you're actually educating. And you'll be able to see on here that the number that the state says we have varies with the number that Mr. Morton gave you the other day. And that's because Mr. Morton counts students as a whole person, where the state does not.
They don't count whole people, they count partial people.
One person is one, where at the state level, one person that goes to a trade school is 0.3. So that's where the variance between those numbers come from. The Fair School funding is also being phased in. So the phase-in is a 5-year phase-in, and we are currently in year 3 in 2025. So we have 2 years left of the phase-in, and as all of you know, if you watch TV for any length of time, you will see that there's a lot of change that might happen down at the state level when it comes to who's going to be running and controlling the biennium budget. So not knowing what that biennium budget is, this forecast assumes that the Fair School Funding Plan will be phased in accordingly. But if that does not happen, or if whoever runs the state, whoever's the governor, decides to change that, then of course there'll be changes to this forecast. Any questions? This is the chart I was talking about. This is talking about the changes from May to now. So the things that we went over are basically what has changed from the May forecast to now. We submit our final count of students in like August. So once those final numbers come out, there's like a kind of a tie out to the state foundation formula that they give us. So that actual has been collected, so that is forecast forward in this 5 years. So you can see that the changes in the collection is between 19,000, and it goes up to 300,000, up to 600, and up to 836. And the years after this year have to do with that additional phase as well. The chart that you see there is the enrollment. You can see from 22 to 23, this is where we were getting paid for open enrollment in, open enrollment out, and this is where we're getting paid for butts and seats. So you can see in 2025, I'm estimating 2,350, I think that's an 8. Based on what the state foundation funding formula has. And those numbers, actually today, we got the foundation funding formula with the updated numbers. So our enrollment is going up, as Mr. Morton talked about before, and that is where we're also seeing some of the increases to this line item because we are on the formula. Because as I've explained before, we used to be what they call a guarantee district, which means that you receive no less than you received in a prior year. And it's usually 2 years back. But now, since our enrollment has changed, we are a formula district, which is a good thing because it means every new student that we get new money. So unfortunately, it works in reverse as well. Restricted grants and aid. Normally, this is like just one of those things that you look at, we don't ever get any more money, it's just kind of there. But there's been a lot of changes in this line item over this forecast. The first one starts with student wellness and success funding. You remember when we very first got that, it was put into what they call a 467 fund, which was outside the general fund. So that revenue and that expense was not reported in the 5-year forecast in historical years. Starting in 22, 23, they moved that back to the general fund. So the expenses came back, but it came back with the revenue source. So you just see an increase in restricted aid But you also see an increase on the other side in like salary and benefits, or whatever we use to pay that out of student wellness and success. You'll see on the board agenda tonight, we have a student wellness and success and a DPIA plan for the board to review. We're required to do that every year, but that is the first two funding sources that I have up there. So outside of student wellness and success, we get money for career tech programs. We also now have a gifted restriction, which means that we get about $125,000 in gifted, and we have to spend it on certain gifted items. So that's why Ms. Lewis, who handles gifted funds, came up with a plan where we reintroduce services this year so that we can actually spend that money, or else we have to send it back. So I think was that this year we brought her back? Okay, so we brought back a gifted teacher who we're now serving students that are gifted. So English learners, we get a small amount of money for that as well, and it also is earmarked for that purpose. So the biggest change in this forecast is disadvantaged pupil impact aid. And if you look over at the second kind of graph, it kind of talks about the community eligibility provision that you guys approved for the free lunches and free breakfasts for kids. So the money for lunches comes out of a federal fund called the cafeteria fund, which is in what I call an 06. So it's outside the general fund. None of that's incorporated in here. So when you went to CEP, our economically disadvantaged percentage went up because we're serving all kids. So it went up to close to 100%. Because of that, our disadvantaged pupil impact aid money is driven by the economically disadvantaged number. So that resulted in an increased disadvantaged pupil impact aid to the general fund because that's where it's posted. Now it's restricted to certain things, which you'll see in the plan that we present tonight, that's what we're trying to spend those things on. But it also it's a significant increase in that funding, which actually offsets the loss of the ARP ESSER fund, because that was Mr. Morton and I's biggest concern moving forward with this forecast in May, was that we were losing the ARP ESSER funding stream, and that was about $1.5 million a year of expenses that were coming back that we would have to find either a new funding stream for, or absorb, or not absorb, which wouldn't have been the best solution, I don't think, but this offsets that. It allows us to continue forward in a pretty positive position. So that chart down there shows you the increases in funding, and you can see from 24 to 25, that's that DPIA change. I'm almost done, guys, I swear. Restricted aid, this just shows the changes from the May forecast to this forecast. In 2022, that bar right here shows the change in student wellness and success funds coming back to the general fund. In 2025, you see the increase in DPIA funding. So remember, this is a year-over-year change, not a change every year. So it's not that it's going up for 6%, it's 6% different from the previous year. That makes sense. Because our funding is not going down as shown in the graph, it's actually going up. It's just the changes from the May to now are changing in that same respect. So I have a note at the bottom, which every treasurer has to have, that basically says, if the district decides no longer to participate in CEP, or the state funding formula changes and DPIA gets taken away or reduced, that'll significantly impact these changes. So the majority of the changes from mid-May to November forecast are happening in revenue with the DPIA, with the additional tax revenue, and all having that funding stream to offset the additional expenses that are coming back with ARP ESSER, which we've all been aware of for several years. We just hadn't had a funding stream to offset those. So the last thing is just all other revenue and total financing sources. All of the revenues is 4%. It includes things like tuition, interest on investments, payments in lieu of taxes, and like rentals, other miscellaneous collections that the school district has. The forecast change and historical change are pretty similar. And the only thing that really increased from the May to this forecast was at the end of the last year, in June, we had collected over $1 million in interest. So that then up the future years. Total financing sources is really just a kind of an accounting of advances in, returns in. So if we advance money out to, at the end of the year, to cover an expense, because we can't close funds with negative balances unless they're grants and we have a documentation showing that we're gonna receive those monies. We have to do that, then once we close the year, we advance it back. And then refund of prior year's expenses. So in June, sometimes we'll get a payment of something that happened previous to June, and we have to post that for accounting purposes as a refund of prior year expenses, so it goes on that year's books. There wasn't any changes in forecasted years, but there was changes in actual collections in 24 for both of those categories. So. Any questions on revenue? Have I lost anybody yet? Personnel costs, expenses, majority, as everyone knows, is personnel costs, salary and benefits. They make up 55% and 22%, so you see that green and the blue, that's what we spend on, the green is what we spend on people. So, as we talked about before, if we ever have to cut a budget or if we ever have to reduce expenditures, it's really hard not to touch personnel costs because of the large portion that they play into our budget every year. So purchase services is about 14%, and then all other is about close to 8%. So and that includes supplies, capital outlay, debt, and other objects. So I know you're excited, but we'll go through those line by line. Personnel services, salary and benefits. Not purchasers. So personnel services, which are salary and benefits. Salaries represent, I can't read that number, 55, and benefits represent over 22%. The impacts on this line item are affected by attrition. They are affected by ARP-ESSER funding returning to the general fund. The other thing that impacts and drives that is union negotiations when we have base cost increases. And all of you are aware that we negotiated a contract this year for 3 years with both unions. Historical change has been about 3%, but going forward, the forecast change is about 6%. That has mainly to do with the fact that those ARP-ESSER expenses are coming back to that line item. So for benefits, the district saw decreases in this line item as well, because when you take a personnel or general fund, you take their benefits with you. So those benefits were out of the general fund as well, and they're coming back this fiscal year. I also have forecast a larger than received health insurance increase for this calendar year 2025. The previous forecast I had forecast, I think the lowest I forecast was 6%, because in the future we have a 9%, a 13%, a 4.5%. So I kind of took the average between the two of those and forecast those forward, but this year we only saw a 2% increase. So that made a difference in the benefits section with what we were going to be expending over the next 5 years. Any questions on personnel? And again, you can see they make up 78% of total expenditures. These are, like I talked about, the changes from the May to November. One of the things that ODU came out with when they switched over to ODU and when they've been looking at like school district finances, they've really been dialing in on 5-year forecasts and how they're being forecast and how treasurers are representing those. So one of the things that they kind of didn't mandate but mandated was that like we used to talk about, we used to go over the changes from one forecast to another. We can't necessarily do that anymore. The best practice is for us to present both the overview of the forecast and then the changes from the previous forecast. That's why the notes are like 7 pages longer than what they should be. But that's why I'm going over all this, even though you guys are all aware of what the previous forecast said. But the changes from May, like I said, personnel services was the ARP-ESSER coming back into there. Fiscal year 2024 also came in $104,000 less than what was forecasted in May, so that carries forward as a reduction of expense. For For benefits, the May forecast, again, I talked about the forecasting the 6% to 11%, and now I had changed that to 2% to 8%. So those are forecast forward and make changes to the expense line item for the new forecast. Any changes on salary and benefit, or any questions on salary and benefits or changes? No. Purchase services, they're 14% of all expenditures. They have changed, the fair school funding plan has changed this, as we talked about before, because it talks about open enrollment coming in, open enrollment going out. This would be where we posted the open enrollment going out. So that has significantly changed the cost structure of this over the historical years. Again, we talked about the ARP ESSER returning from the outside the general fund to the general fund. And the district saved over $100,000 from switching to the Ohio School Council Electric Consortium. That's also reflected in numbers going forward. From the May forecast to November, actual expenses in fiscal year 24 were $224,000 less than forecast in May. In future years, we're not impacted at all. So change from the May forecast to now. So any questions? I think the next slide will show you, a lot of people ask, like, you know, what is a purchaser? So basically what we use purchasers for, and our biggest line item, as you can see, is the blue, which is contracted services, and that includes our contract with the ESC for special education services, IEC center, preschool, and you can see where those amounts are going up as those expenses that were paid from ESSER go back into the general fund. The other large one we have is tuition, payments going out, and that's based on the clientele that we have. And it's mostly trended on historical averages because we don't know when we're going to receive a child that's going to need services that cost more than what another child would receive. So, but that kind of gives you an idea of what makes up that line item and what are the major contributors to it. The three last line items that are left are supplies, capital outlay, and other objects. Supplies is only 4% of expenses. Largest expense there is textbooks, and that's where we would also take Chromebooks out of. So about 3 years ago when we got all the ESSER funding, we used to record purchase of like equipment like laptops and computers out of a 600 fund code, which is capital outlay. And the federal government has made it so where they want that coded as a supply, not as a capital outlay for whatever reason they feel it's not a capital expenditure. So Chromebooks are now purchased out of supplies. And textbooks and Chromebooks were purchased with ESSER funds over the last 3 years. So those schedules will be coming back into the forecast. And they kind of started to come back into the forecast a little bit in 2024 with the large series of books that we purchased at the end of the year, because not all of that could come out of ESSER, which is why it kind of skews a historical change higher than what it normally would have been if you didn't have that large expense for books for this year. The changes there and his actual expenses in fiscal year 2024 were $224,000 less. That is mostly because we took some of the books that we ordered, we couldn't pay until after the fiscal year closed, because we divided it up that way so that we wouldn't be deficit spending. So that was that change. Capital outlay that's normally spent on buses and school vehicles and educational equipment. There's a small percentage of that. The historical average change has been about 45,000, and the forecast change going forward is 60. As I've discussed before with capital outlay, we have a rotation schedule for buses that we always forecast. And we also have a rotation schedule for vehicles that we forecast forward as well. In doing that, usually if we deficit spend or deficit spending in that year, unfortunately, those line items are the first to go. So they are forecast forward at this point in this forecast, but that may change in future years based on the economics of the district. The only other thing there is other objects. It's less than 1% of our expenses. The major expense in there is property tax collection fees. So the Defiance County Auditor, the state of Ohio collects taxes on our behalf, property taxes to the county, income tax to the state. So they charge us a percentage fee for that. And you can see there that in fiscal year 23, it was 1,018. And then the property insurance is the other one that impacts that, and that was 78,000. So I don't know if you remember, in 2024, we saw a large proposal with the current insurance company we have for property tax, so we switched to a different company to reduce that. So you'll see a small reduction in 2024, but then it continues to go up in 2025 for property insurance, and as well as county audit records. The only changes to those three line items were the actual expenses in fiscal year 24 were less than what was forecasted in May. Like I said, these three items are very, I wouldn't say insignificant because they're very needed. But when we talk about making reductions to the district, there's not a whole lot of expense in supply capital outlay and other objects that can be reduced to offset that. So a lot of people say like, oh, you reduced my supply budget, and necessarily that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to us, just because of the fact that it doesn't have a huge impact on the district, but it does have a huge impact on the classroom. So we try to look at other places to reduce those costs. Excellent. Forecast summary. So you've heard people talk about 3 days cash before, and this basically gives you a summary of all of the revenue variances are up here from the May forecast in November, and you can see that the revenue projections are up 6.57%. These are all the changes to expenses and the amounts that relate to them, and they are down 1.57% from the May forecast. I know a lot of people say, well, you just told us that ARP ESSER is putting all these expenses back into the forecast, and that is true, but that was forecast in May. So this is the change from that to this. So what I estimated in May was going to be that change is actually in November is less than what I thought it was going to be, but it's not less of an expense. You can see the bar graph down there on 3 days cash. We go from 28 in the May forecast up to 157 in this November forecast. So you can see that it's a healthier forecast, that the outlook is better financially moving forward. And the last slide just talks about how the November forecast continues to model declining revenue, but it is significantly better than the May forecast. So if you look at this graph here, it shows you that the shortfall that was expected in May, I can't read that number, was greater than 15%, but now the shortfall that's expected in the November forecast at the end of the forecast is less than 2%. Or greater than 2%, sorry. So there's been a significant changes from the May to the November in a positive direction. That's all I got. Does anybody have any questions?
So we are now, yeah, kind of at the moment, Cheryl. We are now like 14 out of 200 maybe some school districts on our pupil.
Per pupil. So
Pupil,
yeah, I didn't look up what we were last year. I know that we're always like in the 10 to 20 range. But yes, if you look up the financial report card, which I think I'm the only person that looked at it, you'll see that with our comparison districts, we are 14 out of 262, I believe, when it comes to spending money on classroom instruction.
Right, and all I want to do is point out that for many years, when we were tanked on the report card, we were in the bottom 20% in the state of per pupil expenditure. So that investment is paying off when it comes to our kids.
And as you can see, when we talked about the per pupil expense on the report card, is actually less than what the state per pupil average is, but yet we're still spending more than the state is on classroom instruction. So we're spending less money in better places.
Right. I just
So
wanted
it's a
to
good direction to
reiterate
head
that for the
So, and then, questions? That was good. Question mark. So, any other questions from anyone? I know most of you just want me to sit down now.
Good job, Cheryl.
Good job, Cheryl.
Good job, Cheryl.
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to share with you. I just share with Mrs. Swisher, she did it, all of that in only 44 minutes and 6 seconds. So you did a great job. She puts a tremendous amount of time and spends a great deal of time communicating with everyone that she needs to in preparing this document. And she does an outstanding job. And as much grief as I give her about the amount of time it takes, it's important. It's a legal requirement, and she does an outstanding job. So thank you, Cheryl.
Information worth knowing.
And if any of you like more information, I'm more than happy to sit down with you in my office and go over it more in depth.
The real
No one seems to
presentation,
take me up on
the
that,
real
but it's there.
presentation's an hour and 40 minutes.
So,
When you start, we don't have to worry about that.
Okay, so let's go ahead and move on with our agenda here. So Cheryl, you now have some discussion items.
the first one is just capital conference reminders. I'm a little bit freaking out because I'm not gonna be there, but Mr. Morton has assured me that he will take good care of you. But I did print out kind of a high-level agenda, so that you guys can have that with you, so you kind of know where things are and where Mr. Morton will be a certain time.
I think what she's saying is that she doesn't trust me to
I trust
execute
him,
her plan.
I
So-
mean, it's a job requirement that we're controlling.
Yeah.
So but hopefully everything goes smooth. I hope you guys learn a lot of things. I apologize again that I can't be there, but hopefully everything will go smoothly. And I handed those schedules out, I believe, to all of you.
Yes, thank you for doing that.
The next thing we have is speech service agreement between Northwest Ohio ESC, Holy Cross School, and Defiance City Schools. And then we have another one with the ESC, St. John's Lutheran, and Defiance City Schools. You have already approved these contracts. The total amount of the contract has not changed, but the addendum, which was signed by the board president, has changed. And the reason that's changed is because St. John's Lutheran, as all of us are aware, are only offering K-1. So their division of money that is spent through the school district for this contract has changed. Theirs has decreased. Holy Cross's has increased based on their proportionate amount of students. Am I saying this right, Beth? Based on the proportionate amount of students that they're serving. So we just have to bring those back, even though it's not an increase, and we don't pay it through our coffers anyways. We pay it through our coffers, not with our money. It's money we get from the state for the non-publics. We wanted to make you aware of those changes since it was a signed document by the board president. So, last thing I have, I think, my computer died. Yeah. Okay, next thing is the student wellness and success plan and disadvantaged people impact aid. So you've seen these in the past. This basically is the plan. What is in the public notes is basically from the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce, and it kind of outlines what we can spend these two funding streams on. If you remember, we talked about them being restricted funding, so we have to spend them on a specific purpose. So there's a team, Sherry Steyer, Beth Lewis, myself, Mr. Morton, and Beth Hench, get together and we talk about things that we can use to spend this money on. As you can remember from the forecast, the DPIA is increasing, so we have to come up with some ideas on how to allocate that money without using it all for new services, because we don't want to have the same issue that we have with ARP ESSER, where you have expenses that you can't put back in without a funding stream. So we're trying to do a little bit of both. We're trying to offset the additional expenditures, as well as we have some allocation to look at new programs to fund according to those resources. And we're required by law to present the plan to the board. You're not required to approve it, but we are we do require that we present it to you. And I don't know if either of you guys want to speak on what those items are, but that is why the plan is.
I'll give you an overview. It is mental health services, physical health services, really appropriate prevention surface such as suicide awareness, substance abuse prevention, homelessness and how we can assist with that, child welfare, involved students that are involved in the judicial system or the welfare system and how we can assist those. Working with community liaisons and programming, bringing that into the school district. And most importantly, Bob's opinion is family engagement activities, engaging our families to become more involved in our school district. Before and after school programming, again, we're talking about our before and after school programming such as our Beyond the Bell and our Dog Pound, reading improvement and intervention, which we are diving into deeply at the elementary school, professional development, dropout prevention, safety measures, academic interventions. What am I missing? I was reading most of those and then I just kind of, Beth Hench is like, good job, Mr. Morton. I read them off the list, Beth. All right, I had it on my laptop. So, but you go through each of those and some of the expenditures qualify and some don't. So we have to go through and then if we're not sure, Cheryl has a contact at ODU, Beth Hench has one, Sherry has one, and they all send off, what do you think, would this be an expenditure that would be approved or not? We usually get a yes or a no. I shouldn't say that. Most of the time we get, well, it can only be spent on these things. They never answer us, and so we have to figure out.
They send us what we've given you,
Yes, yeah.
which is
So.
open to our interpretation, I guess,
Yeah.
but in conjunction with that, I think I mentioned it during my presentation, the October number 2 foundation payment that we just received, and actually we won't receive it until Friday, but that we got the detailed sheet today, those numbers have changed. They both went up. I'm fine.
FLSA, new
Yeah, so
salary
I
threshold.
think that is the last thing I have
It is.
now. I went to a ESC meeting and they talked about the new FLSA, new salary threshold. So in every year, according to the Fair Labor Standard, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't know how much you know about this law thing, but there are like minimum.
It's been the same for a long time.
Yes.
It increased on July 1. It's
And
gonna
now they're
increase again
increasing it in
on
January 1, correct.
So there's a set amount that you have to make if you're considered, I call it an exempt employee, they call it like an administrative or executive employee. And so every year we have to do like a formula to see whether or not we're paying that person, paying people that are considered administrators that appropriate amount of money. It's never been an issue, but moving forward, because in January 2025, they are raising it again. We may have issues with some employees not meeting that threshold. So that would be a conversation that we would come back to you with in December, if we had to adjust their salaries to accommodate for that threshold.
Or the other option would be just moving them to hourly.
Yes, in which case we would pay them overtime.
Yeah.
And pulling the overtime for the individuals that I had in question, we would be a lot better to move
Increase
forward
their
with
salary.
this.
Yeah.
And I've been told, and correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, that we can prorate that based on the weeks they work. So if we have an employee that works, say, 33 weeks in the year, we can take 33 weeks of that salary amount, that minimum amount, and prorate it down. So I have never seen that in writing anywhere, but that's what, this presenter was Ryan LaFlamme, who's your guys'
Board
person
attorney.
that does most of your civil defense Britain. He did talk about that because it's only unique to school districts because of how we stretch pay people.
You stretch pay people, and for example, let's say you have somebody that is a 9-month employee, but they're an administrator, they supervise cafeteria or transportation or something like that. Then you have to look at, or they're a 10-month employee, you have to look at the minimum requirement and then how many weeks they work. And his interpretation of the law is that you can prorate that based on how much they work, as long as you're meeting that threshold, because they're not a year-round employee. So I'm sure there will be way more to discuss fast and furiously between now and January 1.
We just wanted to put it on your radar because if we do have to come back to you,
We'll have to do it either next month
well,
or
probably
December.
I
Yeah,
would just wait until December. There was a similar change that was gonna happen in 2016, and then there was a change in administration,
Okay.
and it went away.
Okay,
So
Okay,
that
perfect.
could potentially happen.
absolutely.
So probably there's one meeting in December, so, and we could always, present it as according to the law. So if the law does change between the end of the board meeting and January 1, then we can use that for the public, so
All right,
I think that's it.
so, need a motion for 4-1, that's the speech service agreement with Holy Cross and ESC.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Any questions? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Moats,
Yes.
Mr. Wall,
Yes.
Mrs. Everly,
Yes,
Mr. Bagel.
Yes.
And then we're also gonna do that for 4.2, only with St. John Lutheran.
I'll move on 4.2.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Wall,
Yes.
Mr. Bagel.
Yes.
Mrs. Everly,
Yes,
Mr. Moats,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis.
Yes. And we will entertain a motion to approve the November 5-year forecast.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Any other questions or discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Everly,
yes.
Mr. Moats,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Wall,
Yes.
Mr. Bagel.
Yes.
Mr. Martin, you are up.
All right. If you take a look, this Friday is the end of the first grading period. Our band marches in the Defiance Halloween Parade on Saturday. And then Sunday, November 3rd, daylight savings time's in and we fall back. Everybody's usually recharged then. The 5th is Election Day if you haven't voted early. Something important coming out of the way, the Defiance County Commissioners are doing a road show this year and they're traveling around to schools and they will be hosting their regular county commissioners meeting at Defiance High School at 9 a.m. in the gymnasium. And they ask that our government students and government teachers attend. They've included some instructional materials to go with them, so they'll be here. Again, those are open meetings to the public. Our Veterans Day breakfast is at DES on the 8th, and then the assembly's at 2 o'clock in the afternoon that day. We will all be at Capitol Conference on November 10, 11, and 12. There's a Veterans Day assembly for the middle school and high school here on November 11th. Winter Meet the Bulldogs on the 18th. You're back here on the 20th for a board meeting, and then no school November 27th through 29th. So everybody's enjoying a happy Thanksgiving with their family. Does anyone have any questions? Hearing none. Item 5.2, property purchase. Just want to let you know we did close on the 1925 South Jefferson Street property last Friday. Mrs. Davis, Mrs. Swisher, and myself went and took care of that. I did bring up to you on 5.3. Any questions on the closure? All right. 5.3, the addendum. We did discuss this, that we thought we may be approached. We have been approached. And actually at the closing, they asked us if we could reconsider this. We told them to get us the information, which they got to us after the agenda went public. That's why Kathy announced it was an addendum item. This driveway easement already exists for the entire property. However, the building that it encompasses is split into 2 separate parcels, and it only encompasses the front parcel of the building, and the owner is selling the back parcel to the same person that bought the front parcel. They would just like to have it encompass both parcel numbers. The attorney at Weiner, Hill, and Weber, Jim Weiner, submitted that to Cheryl and I yesterday. And you will see a recommendation to grant that easement access. It's essentially just adding the parcel number to what already existed. Okay. Any questions there? You'll see in item 5.4 an out-of-state travel request for the baseball program to travel to Sarasota, Florida during our spring break of March 22nd, 2025 through March 28th of 2025. There was no school being missed. That is all funded solely by the baseball parent group. And I do believe I have that as an action item in the consent agenda as well. They've submitted this to Mr. Jerger and Mr. Beauty. They reviewed it and then submitted it to me for your approval as they travel out of state. And last but not least, our favorite time of the evening, our administrative reports. Mrs. Davis?
Thank you all for doing those. We have reviewed them and you're off the hook tonight. So be ready next meeting though, because I will want to hear all of it, okay? We all do.
I'll interpret that Mrs. Swisher talked too long, therefore she doesn't want to listen to you.
You're welcome.
That's not it at all. I'm just
No, it's
thinking
not.
of you guys tonight, okay? So, again, we appreciate you getting those reports into us and we have reviewed them, but next meeting, be prepared to do your thing, okay? So if you would like to leave, you're welcome to do so, but we're about done. All right, we're gonna move on. I do have, an action item on 6.1 for that driveway easement. Do you have a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve.
I'll second the drive. 6-1.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Mr. Wall,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Roots,
Yes.
Mrs. Oberlin.
Yes.
Mr. Bickle.
Yes.
Okay, now we're gonna go into the consent agenda, and I wanna note on donations, we received $6,500 from the athletic boosters to replace turf on the softball, baseball fields. That's greatly appreciated. And 20 boxes of items from Joanne Fabrics valued over $6,500. The baseball program is on there for their trip, and I really don't note anything else of great interest here.
Numerous winter supplementals.
Oh,
Does that 6,500, replace both in their entirety? The turf, or is it?
It's for the batter's boxes and the pitcher's mounts, they get
Oh.
worn out. That's what's
Oh,
being, and so the
okay.
Athletic Boosters is giving a donation of $6,500. There's actually an expense on the school district's part, but it's for the batter's boxes and
Ah.
pitcher's mounts on both
I thought
fields.
that didn't sound like enough.
No, that's
for them.
definitely not.
Okay.
No, there would be another couple more commas in there.
Okay.
I believe it was half a day when,
Yeah.
and I guess that we have a lifetime repair on the turf. So it's cheaper for us to buy the turf and use the lifetime repair than it is to replace the turf
Yeah.
ourselves.
Ah, I see.
So
Until we have to,
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
so.
we actually are out of the brown turf, so the expenses, Brian,